Okay. So, the song is a very straightforward song. It seems to take everything down and kind of simplify it into numerous chords. I mean, think about it. There's nothing you can do that can't be done. Nothing you can sing that can't be sung. Nothing you can make that can't be made. And he ends every verse with, it's easy. And so I know it's a Beatles song, and I know the majority of us aren't a bunch of hippies being like, yeah, man, all you need is love. Totally. But maybe living a full, content life could be that simple. In the Bible, in the book of John, Jesus says, I give you a new commandment. Love each other, just as I have loved you, so you also must love each other. This is how everyone will know that you are my disciples, when you love each other. So in this passage, Jesus is talking to a group of his Jewish followers about this new commandment. Now, the Jews were no strangers to commandments. Ever since God had saved the people of Israel from Egypt over 1,000 years earlier, their entire culture and government was wrapped up in commandments. It was called the Law of Moses. And the Law of Moses was strict and unyielding, not to mention complex and extremely difficult to follow. But here, Jesus is placing so much value on this one thing. He says, love each other as I have loved you. In the Law of Moses, there was no emphasis on some things, while others were of less importance. It's interesting that it's never referred to as the laws of Moses. It's always singular. So, regardless of how massive and complex this single law was, if you were guilty of just breaking one small little aspect, you were guilty of breaking the entire law. There's another book in the Bible called Galatians that talks about this topic a lot. And the author writes a very simple yet very profound point. And he says, look, I, Paul, am telling you that if you have yourself circumcised, having Christ won't help you. Again, I swear to every man who has himself circumcised that he is required to do the whole law. So circumcision was a part of the law of Moses, was a big part of the law of Moses. Every man who lived under this law needed to be circumcised in order to be considered saved by God. It was just a symbolic action that showed the separation of the flesh from the spirit. And the author of Galatians, Paul, who is by far one of my favorite people of all time, traveled with a man named Barnabas, telling people all over parts of Western Asia about this revolutionary concept of love and grace that Jesus spoke of. And it was awesome. These people had no idea that there was this one being who just wanted to love them. Regardless of what they did, he just wanted to love them. They had no idea. And so people's lives were changed by Paul and Barnabas. And every town they went to, there were just awesome things happening, like healings, and people actually feeling like their lives were fulfilled. And it was amazing. And people were just kind of coming around this idea of love and grace. And Paul and Barnabas kind of cultivated churches and leaders in those churches. And every town they went to, there was just it happened all over again. Every time they got there, people were just shocked to hear about this love and grace. And so they went through their journey through Western Asia and developed churches and leaders, and then they went back and stopped in each town again and showed support and love. But when Paul returned home, he actually caught wind of some people who were trying to teach the churches that he just left that Jesus wasn't enough, that they needed to follow the law as well, particularly circumcision, which was a big deal, like I said, under the law of Moses. But if we look at what Paul had just said in Galatians, he said, again, I swear to every man who has himself circumcised that he is required to do the whole law. So these people that were trying to claim to be wise were actually rather stupid, because they had no idea that the law had to be followed in completion, and that not just little parts. So Paul not only loved God with a ridiculous, inspiring love that I think only a crazy person could attain, but he was also an amazing and impactful writer. And so he wrote about this idea of the new law that Jesus spoke about to this group of people that were called the Galatians. Now Galatia, which is where the Galatians lived, it's pretty simple, is actually a merging of two words. You have Gallo, Gracie. And you have Gallo for a Gaul tribe that settled in a Greek area, which is where the Gracie comes from. So you have Gallo Gracie. So you have this mixture of Celtic Gaul culture with Greek culture. And neither of these cultures actually had any background in Jewish law at all. So it was very easy for them to kind of fall under the prey of these people who were saying that Paul was wrong and you need to follow the law and Jesus, that it's not enough just to follow Jesus. So Paul loved these people desperately. And he didn't want to see them start following this lie that was just created to manipulate them. So he wrote this letter, which is where we get the book of Galatians from. And he goes into extensive detail to show how dangerous it was for them to disregard the new commandment that Jesus spoke of. And in the last chapter of his letter, Paul makes an interesting statement. He says, "Brothers and sisters, if a person is caught doing something wrong, you who are spiritual should restore someone like this with a spirit of gentleness. Watch out for yourselves so you won't be tempted also. Carry each other's burdens, and so you will fulfill the law of Christ." Now this is one of the two places in the Bible that the law of Christ is mentioned. It's not exactly known what it means, but there are a few opinions and a few options, because Jesus did say a lot of things like, do this and your life will be more fulfilling, or don't do that or your life will be empty, and things of that nature. However, there's only one time that Jesus specifically said anything about a law, and that's when he said, "I give you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, so you also must love each other." But I find it interesting that one of the two times that Paul mentions this elusive law of Christ is in connection with bearing each other's burdens. And it makes sense when you look at it, because that law seems to be love each other as Christ loved us, because Jesus died on the cross solely to carry our burdens. So it seems that a life that is filled with love can be attained by simply carrying each other's burdens. I think another important part of this particular scripture is gentleness. We all make mistakes, and a lot of times we need people to tell us that we're making mistakes, as well as telling people we care about that they're making mistakes. It's part of loving someone. But an important part of that process is gentleness. When I was growing up, I had a very loving family. They were very supportive. I had a great family. But as a kid, I knew how to get into trouble very easily. And honestly, I'm pretty sure I still have that skill. But my parents, I think that my parents didn't really know how to do this whole restoring me with the spirit of gentleness thing. Whenever I would get myself into trouble, it was always made into a huge ordeal. And instead of gentleness, they would use fear to try to correct me for whatever it was that I did. And I'm not claiming to know, everything about love and fear. But I think I can say, after experiencing some relationships with people, that using fear is not a good way to be gentle. I think a good way of dealing with someone who's done or is doing something wrong is to focus on strengths, not their weaknesses. Call out who they are through encouragement and love, and I think you can achieve a spirit of gentleness. So honestly, at this point, if I were sitting out there listening to me talk, I would be thinking, okay, really interesting stuff, but what does that have to do with me? Well, let me go back to this first story I had and try to tie it all together for you guys. As I said, I wasn't able to let myself be loved. But I still felt a certain amount of love for other people. That love compelled me to want to be available for people when they needed me and support them in their weaknesses and difficult times. What I didn't realize at the time is that by not letting them carry my burdens when I needed them to, I was robbing them of their love. I was taking away their ability to love by keeping them away. And on the same token, I've missed out on some potentially great friendships because of being too afraid to be the first one to open up myself and be vulnerable.